Welcome back. I hope all is well. Today we're going to talk about PLLCs. I get asked about PLLCs all the time. People want to know how to start a PLLC, how long does it take, do they need one, what does a PLLC do, all sorts of questions about PLLCs. And at the end of the day, I've also noticed that there's a great deal of confusion about PLLCs. People think that they need one to get started. Some people think that establishing a PLLC will protect all their personal assets, which actually is not true at all. We'll talk about that later in the video. There's just a lot of misunderstanding about PLLCs. And what happens with this misunderstanding is that people establish one when they really don't need to. They spend time and resources getting one set up when they didn't really have to do that. I also see people not setting one up when it would be really helpful. So today I want to clear up all the confusion, answer as many of your questions as I can about PLLCs. I am someone who's established a PLLC in the state of New York. So today we're going to talk specifically about PLLCs in the state of New York. Now, I'm sure some of this information may translate to other states. However, I am not entirely sure what translates to different states. Some states don't have PLLCs, they just have LLCs, and we'll talk about that in a second, what the difference is. And as always, I am not a lawyer and I'm not an accountant, so this is not legal advice, nor is it financial advice. I am a therapist who started a PLLC and a group practice here in New York City, and I'm going to share with you what I've learned along the way. However, before we get started, if you haven't done so already, please do go ahead and subscribe down below. Hit the thumbs up button on this video, but only if you want to. There is no pressure. All right, so to get started, let's talk about what a PLLC is. Now, a PLLC stands for Professional Limited Liability Company. You've probably heard of limited liability companies before, LLCs, things like that. And the difference between an LLC and a PLLC is that the PLLC is specifically for those who are in licensed professions. So I'm a social worker. That profession requires a license in order to practice. And because of that, when I establish a business that's doing therapy, it's considered a professional limited liability company. So essentially, professions that require a license, when they start a business, they need to establish a PLLC and not an LLC. And now this I know is specific to the state of New York and some other states. In New York, if you're a professional, meaning a profession that requires a license to practice, and you establish a business, you are required to establish a PLLC and not an LLC. Now, some other states don't have PLLCs, they just have LLCs. For the state of New York though, PLLC. Now this is really important because on LegalZoom, you can hop on there and you can try to establish an LLC, but if you're in New York, you don't really want to do that. You want to make sure that you establish a PLLC. The first thing we're going to clear up here are the misconceptions about a PLLC. All right, and the first one is this. People think that if they establish a PLLC, then their personal assets are going to be protected from lawsuits, malpractice, all that kind of stuff. And this is not the case. If you have a PLLC in the state of New York, if you are a licensed professional in the state of New York, your personal assets are not protected from malpractice, lawsuits, all that kind of stuff, regardless of whether or not you have a PLLC established. Now, I'm not entirely sure why this is, but from the reading and research I've done, this is to prevent licensed professionals from engaging in malpractice. So for example, if you are a surgeon, and you opened up a PLLC, and let's say, for example, you are able to protect your personal assets from lawsuits. So then you might be able to shelter your personal assets in a different bank account. And then if you were to get sued for malpractice, you could potentially have a very little amount tied to your business or your profession. And then malpractice no longer becomes as scary for you. So perhaps you will start acting in ways that are not really compliant because there's not much of a fear there. At the end of the day, the PLLC is a way to protect the consumers of these professional services. So at the end of the day, I think the PLLC actually protects the consumer of the professional services more than it protects the actual provider. And hey, this is what the state of New York has chosen to do. But do know that if you establish a PLLC in the state of New York, you are not protected from malpractice lawsuits. Your personal finances can still be at risk if you get sued for malpractice. So do not get confused about this. However, One thing that is true is that if you have a PLLC and you start a group practice and you have colleagues and people that work with you, you will be protected from their mistakes. So let's say I establish a PLLC, I have a group practice, and I've hired a couple different therapists. Let's say I'm therapist A, and then therapist B makes a mistake and does something that they shouldn't have and is getting sued for malpractice. Then I, as therapist A, will be protected from therapist B's mistake as long as I have that PLLC established. And that's a good thing. So that's something to keep in mind. The other misunderstanding is that people think that they need a PLLC to open up a business bank account. However, this is not true. You can open up a business bank account simply by obtaining an EIN from the IRS website. Now, the one thing that the PLLC does is it creates separation between you as an individual and your business. However, a PLLC is not the only way to create separation. You can also do something called a DBA. This is doing business as. This is another way to obtain an EIN and create some separation between you as an individual and your business. Now, I don't know all the intricacies of a DBA because that's not the route I took. However, you can easily establish a DBA from the IRS website. At least that's what my understanding is. That is what accountants have told me. It allows you to choose a name under which you're conducting business, which would then allow you to get an EIN. And in that case, you will have a business bank account with your DBA and that EIN, and then you'll also have your own personal bank account, and that will create separation as well. So you do not need the PLLC to open up a business bank account. You can do it by establishing a DBA. So let's talk for a moment now about how to set up a PLLC in the state of New York. This also is a topic of confusion. Now, the first way you can do this is by doing it entirely on your own. So there are websites created by the state of New York that give you all the steps you need to follow, all the addresses you need to send forms to, and all the forms you need to fill out. And of course, this is kind of confusing. The website is not all that intuitive. You have to send mail to places and fill forms out that aren't that clear. However, it's totally doable. People do this. It is going to require a lot of time. It's going to be quite frustrating because you're going to have to connect to the state of New York every time you have a question. There are different forms you have to fill out, and they're not very clear. Like, you have to put addresses in certain places. Are those addresses public or private? I don't know. Do they get listed as public or private? What names do you put on? It's really confusing. So I'm sure you can Google it and you can do research and talk to people who have done it before. But at the end of the day, it's going to take a lot of time to figure it all out and to get it sent in. Not to mention, when you send it in on your own behalf, you are the only one who can then correspond with the state of New York. And most likely you don't have a personal contact there. There are massive delays in response time. It could really be a nightmare. Obviously, as you can tell, this is not the method that I would recommend, although it is the cheapest method. Of course, you have to pay the standard fees that everyone pays, but that is what anyone would have to do. So you can do that on your own. Again, I don't recommend it. So the other route then, and this is the route I took and one that I would highly encourage you to take, by using a company that will establish a PLLC for you. Now, you can do this with a lawyer or an accountant, and a lot of them will advertise this service. What I have found though is that accountants and lawyers charge a lot of money to do something like establish a PLLC, and you can find an even cheaper method than that. Now, there's a company that I've used called Capital Services. I'm actually going to link their website down below. And for a moment, I'm going to put up their about page here on the screen so you can read who they are and what they do. Because they're not accountants and they're not lawyers, but they're a company that helps set up PLLCs, DBAs, all that kind of stuff. But I'm not sure exactly what kind of company you would call them. All I know is that their name is Capital Services. And let's just take a look at their about page for a second so you can read it for yourself. When I connected with this company to set up my PLLC, they told me exactly what forms needed to be filled out. They told me exactly how they needed to be filled out, and then they sent them off on my behalf. I think they also might have a contact at the state office or the licensing office. So they handled all the paperwork, they handled all the correspondence. They were the ones contacting the licensing board and contacting the state of New York on my behalf. And they did all of that for me. Now, this doesn't mean I didn't do any work. I still filled out all the paperwork. I still had to come up with the questions that I had and clear up any confusion. And then if I had questions, they would go to the state of New York or the licensing board on my behalf to answer those questions. And then we would fill it out correctly. They would also process all the fees for me. So I basically paid Capital Services, and then they would go ahead and do this on my behalf. Now, this did cost money. However, the amount that it cost was far less than it would cost if I used a lawyer or an accountant. The service fees for using them might have been less than $1,000, if I remember correctly. The whole process altogether was less than $3,000. I think it was around $2,500, $3,000, maybe slightly more. I'm giving you ballpark. It was less than $4,000, no more than $3,500. Anyway, and their service fees were not a majority of that. A majority of that was the cost to actually do this through the state of New York that you would have paid if you did it on your own anyway. And now, one of the biggest reasons why you want someone to help you with this, especially in the state of New York, is because there's this antiquated law that makes someone publish something in a newspaper, basically a notice that you're establishing a PLLC in 2 newspapers that have to run for, I think, 6 consecutive weeks. Now, in New York, getting any sort of advertising space in a newspaper is really expensive, and this was actually a bulk of the cost. However, if you're establishing a PLLC, this needs to happen. And so they actually did this for me on my behalf. They found 2 newspapers, they published this advertisement, they allowed it to run, they managed it, and then that was that. We got it all done. To do this on your own would be, I don't even know how you would do this. You would have to start contacting newspapers. At the end of the day, this is an antiquated law, one that makes things really difficult. And just a little history lesson from what I understand is that people would do this back in the day. They'd announce that they were establishing a PLLC, and it would be in a newspaper so that the public could see it. And then if there were any debts or any issues that people had with you, they would be notified and can bring it to your attention or someone's attention before your business was established. People don't read the newspaper like that anymore, so it's antiquated. However, it's still there. So this was the most costly part of the process. One I would not recommend doing on your own, and this is what Capital Services helped me with. Oh yes, and one other thing. The whole process of establishing a PLLC from start to finish, I think it took me, and again, this is ballpark, 4 to 6 months. That's at least what they quoted me. And I remember when everything was finished, it was right around the 4 to 5 month mark. So it does take quite a bit of time. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to say that Capital Services or a company like them is probably going to be your best bet. At least it's what I recommend. And the reason is because yes, it does cost a little bit more money. However, you are going to save a ton of time. And in my opinion, the time that you save can be invested back into your business with something like marketing, networking, building workflows, learning how to use your business tools, this kind of thing. And in the end of the day, those investments in marketing and all that kind of stuff will actually help make more money for you in the long run. Whereas establishing the PLLC, if you spend a lot of time on that, it's not going to pay off too much in the long run. In my opinion, hire someone like Capital Services, have them help you, have them do it for you, and that's the best way to go. So now that we've cleared up a little bit of confusion about misconceptions and we've talked about how to actually establish the PLLC, let's talk about why you might want to start a PLLC and why it might be a good option for you, and then also why it may not be a good option for you. So I think establishing a PLLC would be a good idea if you plan to have a group practice in the future and you want to expand. Also, if you're a little bit more versed in taxes, there are tax benefits. There are things you can do with the PLLC. I'm not entirely sure, but once you get to a certain point or your practice grows to a certain amount, a PLLC will allow you to do different things with the taxes that have some benefit. What I was told from my accountant is that it does take a little while to grow to that point, but a PLLC would be beneficial. If you really want to know about tax benefits, they're not like massive tax benefits, at least when you're first starting. Then you might want to talk to an accountant about whether or not a PLLC is good for you. I did at least want to mention that there are some tax benefits, but it wasn't the main selling point for me. And then also, I think having a PLLC is a good long-term investment, right? So again, this plays right into the first 2 that we just talked about. At some point, you think you're going to want to start a group practice and hire some employees, then you might want to start the PLLC early, just get that done. I think that's a great idea. And why might you not want to start a PLLC? Well, if you're just starting out and you plan on being in solo private practice, you may not need to go the PLLC route. Perhaps you can do something like a DBA, and in that way you still get the separate business bank account. You create separation between your personal finances and your business finances, and you can operate under a different name. So you can pick a business name and use that for your practice. And just to mention, if you wanted to do a DBA, a place like Capital Services will also do that for you as well. Much cheaper, it's much quicker in terms of turnaround time, and you can open up a business bank account in no time. And oh yes, if you're looking to establish a PLLC for increased protection and it's just you, I don't think it's a reason to open up a PLLC, because at the end of the day, the PLLC is not going to protect you personally from a lawsuit. So that's one reason not to open up. If that's why you're thinking about it, it's not a good reason to do it. So that's pretty much it about the PLLC in the state of New York. I hope this clears up some confusion for you. I hope you learned something. I hope it was helpful for you. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you soon.